I'm Emily, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher living in Chicago. On a stormy autumn night, as rain battered my small apartment in Lincoln Park, I found myself alone with only the steady tick-tock of an old clock for company. That night, something felt deeply off, an unsettling sensation creeping over me as the winds howled outside. Little did I know, the shadows of my home held secrets that would soon drag me into a realm of terror I never imagined. I remember that night vividly. I was home alone in my modest Chicago apartment, the kind with creaky wooden floors and old-fashioned charm. The rain poured relentlessly against the windows while the clock in the hallway kept a steady, almost hypnotic tick-tock. I sat in my living room, trying to ignore the constant noise, but deep inside, I knew something was amiss. Every time the clock chimed, my heart skipped a beat, as if it signaled a hidden danger lurking in the darkness. As the night deepened, I began to notice small details that didn't fit the calm of my familiar surroundings. A subtle chill swept through the room, even though all the windows were shut tight. I felt as if unseen eyes were watching me from every corner. The sound of rain mixed with an inexplicable whisper, barely audible, yet disturbingly clear. It was as though my home was trying to speak a secret language meant only for me. I mustered the courage to follow the sound, moving slowly towards the hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, and the silence between the relentless patter of rain and the ticking clock grew increasingly oppressive. My mind raced with every possibility. Was it just the wind, or something more sinister? The feeling of isolation was crushing, and I knew that once I crossed that threshold, nothing would ever be the same. I stepped into the narrow corridor, my heart pounding in time with the clock's steady beat. The hallway, dimly lit by a single flickering light, seemed to stretch endlessly before me. Shadows danced along the walls, twisting into shapes that my anxious mind could barely comprehend. I whispered to myself that it was only my imagination, yet the overwhelming sense of dread told a different story. A sudden soft murmur caught my attention, leading me further down the corridor. I could barely decipher the words, but each syllable felt like a deliberate invitation to the unknown. The murmur was accompanied by a subtle movement, a shadow that slid silently along the wall, as if it were alive. I stopped in my tracks, every nerve in my body screaming that I should run, yet my feet remained rooted to the spot. In that eerie silence, I felt an inexplicable connection between myself and the mysterious presence. Memories of old ghost stories whispered by my grandmother echoed in my mind, reinforcing my fear that something beyond explanation was at work. The realization that I might not be alone became almost unbearable, and every breath I took felt laced with both terror and an odd, irresistible curiosity about what lay ahead. I retreated back into the living room, my mind a whirlwind of fear and disbelief. The cozy space I once cherished now seemed transformed by the sinister happenings of the corridor. The gentle hum of the rain had taken on a menacing tone, and even familiar objects cast unsettling shadows. I could not shake the feeling that the house was hiding a dark secret, a secret that was now intertwined with my fate. Determined to find answers, I searched through old drawers and boxes, looking for anything that might explain the strange occurrences. Among forgotten mementos, I discovered a faded photograph of a smiling family that once lived in the apartment. The image, though warm in its own time, now felt eerily out of place. Their eyes, full of life and hope, seemed to plead with me from the worn paper, as if warning me of a hidden truth that had long been buried. As I examined the photograph, a sudden noise jolted me. It was a soft, almost sorrowful sigh coming from the room's dark corner. I turned sharply, my eyes straining to see in the dim light. For a split second, I thought I saw a figure, a vague, shifting shape that vanished as quickly as it appeared. My heart pounded with fear, and I realized that the mystery of my home was far deeper and more dangerous than I had ever imagined. The following night, I found myself unable to shake the terror of what I had experienced. Determined to confront the unknown, I returned to the corridor with trembling resolve. The familiar sound of rain and the relentless tick-tock of the clock accompanied me once again, but now every creak and whisper felt amplified by my fear. I could sense the presence waiting, hidden in the darkness, watching me with silent malice. This time, the corridor seemed even longer, as if the house itself was distorting space to trap me. My footsteps echoed ominously against the worn wooden floor, each step a reminder of my isolation. The soft murmur of voices grew louder, taking on a mournful tone that made my skin crawl. I could almost understand their lament, a story of loss and despair that was etched into the very walls of my home. A sudden gust of wind slammed a door shut, and the corridor was thrown into deeper shadow. I stood frozen, my mind racing with questions and terror. What was the source of those voices? Who was the mysterious figure that haunted the halls? With each unanswered question, the darkness seemed to close in, and I felt as if I were teetering on the edge of a nightmare from which there was no escape. In the dead of night, the house seemed to come alive with a sinister energy that I could neither explain nor ignore. I decided to document everything in hopes of making sense of the haunting presence. Clutching my phone, I began recording, my shaky voice narrating, each detail as the rain tapped a relentless rhythm on the window panes. The video captured not only the physical space, but also the palpable dread that filled every corner of my apartment. As I moved through the rooms, the atmosphere grew increasingly oppressive. I could feel a cold breath on the back of my neck, and the sound of footsteps echoed in spaces where there should be none. In one particularly dark hallway, I saw a fleeting glimpse of a figure, a gaunt, pale face with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly light. The figure seemed to stare directly at me, its gaze filled with sorrow and malice, leaving an imprint on my soul that I knew would never fade. I managed to record every unnerving detail, but with each passing moment, the boundary between reality and nightmare blurred. The home that had once been my sanctuary had transformed into a labyrinth of terror, with every shadow holding a story of despair. I realized that the true horror was not in the apparitions themselves, but in the overwhelming sense of isolation and the realization that I was truly alone with forces beyond human understanding. By the final night, the haunting had reached a climax that shattered any remnants of normalcy in my life. I sat in the living room, surrounded by silence punctuated only by the sporadic creaks and distant whispers. The recording I had made played over in my mind, each image a reminder of the relentless terror that had invaded my home. It was then that I understood. The house was not just haunted by memories of the past. It was a living entity, hungry for connection and revenge. Desperate to break free from the grip of fear, I confronted the presence head-on. With a trembling voice, I called out to it, demanding to know what it wanted from me. The response was not in words, but in a sudden, blinding flash of light and a cold gust that extinguished every flame in the room. In that instant, I saw faces, lost souls trapped in an endless cycle of sorrow, reaching out to me from the shadows, their eyes full of silent anguish and warnings of an eternal curse. The terror of that night will forever haunt me. I realized that sometimes the past refuses to be forgotten, and the walls we call home may conceal secrets too dark to ever truly escape. Even now, when I try to sleep, I can still hear that relentless tick-tock and feel the presence lurking, just out of sight, a chilling reminder that true terror can live in the most familiar places. I'm Laura, a 29-year-old freelance writer residing in a charming yet weathered home in the heart of New Orleans' French Quarter. My life had always been touched by the city's mystique, but nothing prepared me for that fateful night. As rain pounded the cobblestone streets and eerie silence settled in my home, I felt an inexplicable presence creeping into every corner. Every heartbeat echoed with dread, hinting at the terror to come. Little did I know that the night would soon unfold into a horrifying encounter that would transform my sanctuary into a realm of perpetual fear. I had always found comfort in the familiar creaks and whispers of my old New Orleans home. That evening, the gentle hum of the rain and the rhythmic tick of the antique clock lulled me into a sense of routine. As I settled into my favorite armchair near a rain-streaked window, I thought nothing could disturb the quiet. But then, a soft sound, like a door slowly creaking open, cut through the stillness. I paused, confused and uneasy, as my eyes darted around the dim living room. Stepping cautiously into the hallway, I noticed that the once friendly shadows now felt ominous. Every small noise, the shuffle of my footsteps, the rustle of fabric, became magnified in the silence. I heard a faint whisper that sent chills down my spine. It sounded like someone softly calling my name. The sound was so delicate that I wasn't sure if it was real or just my imagination running wild on such a stormy night. My heart pounded with a mix of fear and curiosity. In that moment, I felt isolated in a way I never had before. The familiar corners of my home seemed to hide secrets in every crevice. I pressed forward, determined to find the source of that eerie voice. With each step, the atmosphere grew heavier, and the silence was broken only by the echo of my anxious breathing and the relentless patter of rain against the window. As I moved further down the narrow corridor, the unsettling sounds grew louder. The soft creak of a floorboard under an unseen weight and the whisper that repeated my name left me trembling. I stopped in front of a closed door at the end of the hall, where the air felt inexplicably cold. My mind raced. Was someone playing a cruel trick, or was there truly something lurking in my house? In that moment, the ordinary transformed into the extraordinary, and every shadow seemed to pulse with malevolence. I pressed my ear against the door, trying to catch any sound that might explain the disturbance. Beyond the door, the darkness was impenetrable, as if it were swallowing all light. The whisper returned, softer and more insistent, causing a shiver to run down my spine. I could almost feel an icy presence on the other side, as if the house itself were warning me to turn back. Doubt and fear warred in my mind, but the need to understand pulled me forward. Gathering all my courage, I slowly opened the door. The sound of the creaking hinge was loud in the quiet night. Beyond the threshold, the room was cloaked in darkness, with only the occasional glimmer of lightning revealing a few antique furnishings and old photographs. In that fleeting moment, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow darting across the wall, before it vanished into the murk. I stood frozen, my pulse hammering, realizing that I was not alone. After that chilling encounter, I retreated back into the safety of my living room, my mind swirling with questions and fear. The rain outside now seemed to mimic the tremble in my heart, each drop a reminder of the unknown. I tried to convince myself that it was only my imagination, that the strange sounds were the quirks of an old building. Yet deep inside, I knew something was very wrong. My home, once a haven of comfort, had turned into a stage for a nightmare I couldn't escape. I began to search for any clues that could explain the strange happenings. While rummaging through an old chest in the attic, a place filled with relics of a bygone era, I discovered a faded journal with entries written in hurried, almost desperate handwriting. The entries spoke of restless spirits and mysterious sounds that had haunted previous occupants of the house. As I flipped through the brittle pages, a chill raced through me. It was as if the past was reaching out to warn me, urging me to leave, before the darkness claimed another soul. The realization that I was living in a house with a troubled history sank in slowly. Every creak of the wooden floor and every whisper of the wind through the cracked windows began to feel like part of a long-forgotten curse. I tried to piece together the stories from the journal with the present horrors, but the answers remained elusive. The more I learned about the house's dark past, the deeper I fell into the grip of terror, feeling that I was now entangled in a fate much larger than my own fear. Night after night, the eerie events grew bolder. I found myself unable to shake off the feeling of being constantly watched. One evening, while preparing dinner in the small, cramped kitchen, I heard the distinct sound of footsteps echoing behind me. Turning around, I saw nothing but the flickering shadow of a lamplight swaying with the movement of the branches outside. Still, that unsettling sensation that someone, or something, was there, lingered long after the sound faded. The atmosphere of the house had changed completely. The once comforting creaks and groans of the old structure now sounded like deliberate warnings. I tried to call a friend, but my hand trembled so much that I almost dropped the phone before dialing. I needed someone to confirm that I wasn't losing my mind. As I listened to the disjointed static on the other end of the line, The whisper came again, this time unmistakably close and chillingly clear. My name was called out, not in a gentle tone, but in a manner that chilled every nerve in my body. No. That terrifying moment, I realized that the haunting was not a trick of my mind, but a presence that had invaded my very existence. The oppressive darkness of the hallway, the icy gusts of wind that seemed to come from nowhere, and the relentless sound of my name had all merged into a single horrifying reality. I knew then that I could no longer ignore the signs. My once beloved home had become a prison of fear, and I was caught in its merciless grip. Determined to uncover the mystery behind the sinister presence, I started to document every eerie detail. I set up a small recorder in the living room and scribbled notes about every unexplained sound, every fleeting shadow. My days and nights blurred together as I immersed myself in research about the history of my house. I learned that decades ago, a tragic event had taken place here, one that left a stain on the very walls of the building, echoing the sorrows and anger of those who had once lived within. Late one stormy night, while reviewing my recordings, I heard a new sound, a soft, sorrowful weeping that was not mine. The sound was accompanied by a cold breeze that brushed against my skin, sending shivers down my spine. I rushed to the corridor, following the faint echo of despair, only to find an old portrait that had fallen from the wall. In the dim light, the eyes of the figure in the portrait seemed to follow me, their vacant stare filled with endless grief. I felt as if the spirit of that person was pleading for help, trapped in a cycle of anguish that had seeped into every corner of my home. In that heart-stopping moment, I understood that the past and present were colliding in a way that threatened my very sanity. The more I uncovered about the house's history, the more I realized that I was not dealing with a random haunting, but with a malevolent force born of sorrow and injustice. The very air in my home grew heavy with the weight of untold stories, and every sound now carried the echo of a lost soul. My heart ached with both fear and a strange empathetic sorrow for the spirit that tormented me. The nights grew darker and the encounters more intense. One particularly stormy evening, I sat alone in the living room when the silence shattered. Once again, I heard a series of rhythmic knocks coming from the basement, a place I had long avoided. With a mix of dread and resolve, I grabbed a flashlight and descended the creaky stairs. The basement was cold and musty, filled with forgotten relics and the lingering scent of decay. In the far corner, I sensed a presence, as if someone or something had been waiting for me all along. My flashlight beam landed on an old mirror propped against a wall. In its reflection, I saw a faint, ghostly figure standing right behind me. The figure's face was blank and sorrowful, its eyes deep voids of despair that seemed to plead silently. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as the figure slowly raised a hand in a gesture that was both inviting and horrifying. The air around me turned frigid, and I felt as if invisible fingers were caressing my skin with a chill that cut to the bone. The spectral encounter left me shaken to the core. I could no longer deny the overwhelming evidence that my home was haunted by a tortured spirit. Every moment in that basement felt like an eternity, each second filled with the silent scream of a soul trapped between worlds. I realized that the ghost was not here to simply frighten me, but to share its tragic story. A story of loss, betrayal, and a deep, unyielding need for redemption. The encounter blurred the line between fear and pity, leaving me with more questions than answers. The final night arrived with a sense of finality I could not ignore. Determined to end the terror, I resolved to confront the spirit once and for all. I gathered every scrap of courage and all the knowledge I had acquired about the house's dark past. In the dead of night, I lit a single candle and sat in the center of the living room, calling out to the presence with a trembling but clear voice. "Show yourself. I want to understand your pain." The silence that followed was more deafening than the storm outside, and my heart pounded as I waited for an answer. Then, as if emerging from the depths of time, the door slowly creaked open, and the spectral figure appeared. It glided into the room, its presence both sorrowful and terrifying. The figure's empty eyes met mine, and in that silent exchange, I sensed a lifetime of grief and longing. The ghost moved closer until it hovered right before me, its form shifting in the dim candlelight. In that fragile moment, I realized that the entity was not merely a harbinger of fear. It was a wounded soul seeking solace and release from a past filled with torment. In the aftermath of that final encounter, my home and my life were forever changed. The oppressive terror that had once dominated every corner of my house slowly gave way to an eerie calm, as if the spirit had finally found the closure it desperately sought. I learned that sometimes facing our deepest fears can bring unexpected understanding and even healing. Yet every time I hear a creak in the night or see a shadow flicker by, I am reminded that some mysteries never truly fade away. My home remains a place where the echoes of the past still whisper in the darkness, a constant reminder of one unforgettable, terrifying night. I'm Samantha, a 31-year-old graphic designer living in a modest suburban home in Seattle. I once found comfort in the quiet nights and the gentle rhythm of rain on my window. That evening, as I settled into a peaceful solitude, a strange energy began to stir within my familiar sanctuary. A feeling of being watched and a subtle chill hinted at secrets lurking in every corner. Little did I know that tonight, the comforting silence would shatter into a nightmare, turning every shadow into a sinister presence. I had always cherished the calm of my home, its warm lights, the soft hum of the refrigerator, and the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof. That night, everything seemed ordinary, until I noticed a series of gentle footsteps echoing softly in the hallway. I sat in my living room, trying to relax, when faint murmurs started seeping through the silence, as if carried by an unseen wind. It felt as though the house was whispering secrets, each sound amplifying my growing unease. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was no longer alone, even though I had been alone all evening. Compelled by curiosity and a hint of dread, I rose to investigate the unusual sounds. As I walked slowly along the dim corridor, every creak of the wooden floor and rustle of fabric heightened my fear. Shadows danced along the walls in unexpected ways, forming shapes that seemed almost alive. The murmurs, though soft, grew persistent, each syllable resembling a quiet plea that tugged at my mind. My heart raced with each step, as if urging me to turn back, yet something inside made me press on into the unknown. When I reached the end of the hallway, I paused before an antique mirror hanging on the wall. In the reflection, I caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow that slid swiftly across the glass, vanishing before my eyes could fully register it. A sudden shiver ran down my spine, and I felt an overwhelming chill that made me question if my mind was playing tricks on me. That brief glimpse transformed the warm familiarity of my home into a maze of dark secrets, leaving me with a lingering sense that something was watching me from every corner. After the unsettling encounter with the mirror, I returned to my living room trying to convince myself that the incident was nothing more than a trick of the light. Yet, as I sat there, the soft sound of footsteps resumed, a quiet, measured pace that echoed through the silence of the night. Each step seemed deliberate, as if someone was carefully following a predetermined path around my home. I tried to ignore the sounds, attributing them to the old pipes and creaky floors of a house that had seen many years. But a persistent feeling of dread refused to subside. The walls, once comforting in their familiarity, now felt like silent witnesses to an unknown presence. I could sense that I was being drawn into a labyrinth of shadows, where every corner concealed a secret, and every murmur carried an ominous message. The gentle sounds gradually became more distinct, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop noticeably. I glanced around, half expecting to see a stranger lurking in the doorway, but found only the dim glow of a solitary lamp. My mind raced with thoughts of unseen eyes and ghostly figures that might be stalking me in the dark. Unable to ignore the growing fear any longer, I decided to follow the sounds further into the depths of the house. I moved carefully through narrow hallways and past rooms filled with memories, each step amplifying the eerie silence that now enveloped everything. The atmosphere felt charged with a strange energy, as though the very air was whispering warnings. Though my instincts urged me to flee, I was strangely compelled to uncover the source of these unsettling noises, a decision that would soon plunge me deeper into a chilling mystery. As I ventured further into the maze-like corridors of my home, the air grew thick with tension and apprehension. Every creak of the floorboards and rustle of curtains heightened my senses, blurring the line between reality and my mounting fears. The murmurs became clearer now, like fragments of a long-forgotten conversation echoing from the walls. I felt a constant prickling on the back of my neck, as if invisible eyes were scrutinizing my every move. With each step, the comfort of solitude turned into a heavy burden of paranoia and suspicion. I reached a narrow, dimly lit hallway lined with old family portraits and relics of a past life. The images, once a source of pride, now seemed to watch me with hollow, accusing eyes. It was in this eerie passage that I heard a soft, almost imperceptible whisper calling my name, a sound so delicate it could easily be dismissed as a figment of my imagination. Yet the tone was unmistakably urgent and familiar, stirring memories of voices from long ago. The corridor felt endless, each step forward taking me deeper into a realm where time and reality twisted into something unrecognizable. In a moment of nerve-wracking clarity, I paused to steady my trembling hands. I leaned against the cool wall, trying to gather the scattered pieces of my courage. The silence that followed was deafening, punctuated only by the distant sound of my own heartbeat. That fleeting whisper, the sound of footsteps behind me, and the shifting shadows combined to create a sensation of being hunted. I realized then that the peaceful solitude I once enjoyed had transformed into a nightmarish trap, one where every sound and shadow held the promise of an unseen threat. The unsettling sounds persisted as the night wore on, and I found myself caught between the desire to flee and the need to understand the mystery unfolding in my home. I began to document every unusual noise and unexplained movement, scribbling down notes on scraps of paper as I moved from room to room. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination as I retraced my steps, trying to piece together a pattern from the seemingly random occurrences. It was as if the house itself was speaking to me through its creaks and whispers, urging me to uncover its hidden past. Venturing into the once familiar kitchen, I noticed the temperature had dropped suddenly, and an icy breeze brushed past me as if guided by an unseen force. The hum of the refrigerator and the soft drip of a leaking faucet formed a dissonant soundtrack to my escalating anxiety. Every shadow in the corner of my eye seemed to move independently, and the walls whispered secrets that I could almost grasp. I felt as though the house was alive, each creak and murmur a piece of a larger, sinister puzzle that I was forced to solve against my will. Determined not to let fear control me, I gathered my courage and decided to search for clues in the attic, a place filled with forgotten relics and old memories. The narrow staircase creaked under my weight as I climbed into a space where time appeared to have stood still. In the dim light filtering through a small window, I discovered old letters and photographs hinting at tragedies that had once haunted this very house. Each piece of evidence deepened the mystery, merging past sorrow with the terror of the present, and left me with a foreboding sense that my home was not merely a shelter, but a repository of hidden dark secrets. Armed with the fragments of history I had uncovered, I felt compelled to confront the source of the ominous presence that haunted my nights. I retraced my steps back to the corridor where the whispers had first stirred, each footstep echoing with the weight of dread. The house seemed to grow colder as I approached the old hallway, its shadows deepening as if to hide the truth within. I paused at a familiar doorway that now appeared far more menacing than before. There, in the half-light, I sensed the unmistakable presence of something watching me, a presence that made my skin crawl with apprehension. I took a deep breath and gently pushed open the door, stepping into a small, cluttered study filled with relics of a bygone era. The room was shrouded in darkness, broken only by the flickering light of a single candle on a dusty desk. As I moved closer, a faint murmur rose from behind a stack of old books, a sound that sent a shiver down my spine. The whispers in the study were layered with sorrow and longing, as if the voices of lost souls were pleading for release. Every object in the room seemed to carry a story of pain and despair, further intensifying the unnerving atmosphere. In a moment that felt suspended, in time I caught sight of movement in a cracked mirror leaning against the wall. A shadow, more defined than any I had seen before, darted across the reflective surface with an eerie swiftness. The sight froze me in place, my heart pounding in my ears as I tried to make sense of the surreal image. It was as if the very essence of the house had taken form, a spectral reminder of a past filled with grief and haunting regrets. In that instant, I realized that the solitude I had once savored was now irrevocably tainted by an inescapable terror. As the night edged towards its darkest hour, I resolved to face the unexplainable terror head-on. I gathered every ounce of strength and returned to the corridor where the whispers and footsteps had first invaded my sanctuary. The house now felt like a living maze, each turn filled with the possibility of encountering the lurking presence that had turned my world upside down. With trembling determination, I called out into the silence, demanding that whoever or whatever was there show itself and end this torment. My voice, though shaky, echoed through the empty halls, challenging the darkness to reveal its secrets. For a long, breathless moment, nothing answered but the persistent patter of rain and the low hum of distant echoes. Then, as if summoned by my defiance, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. A sudden gust of cold wind swept through the corridor, and the shadows coalesced into a single, unmistakable figure. It emerged slowly from the depths of the dark hallway, a spectral form that moved with both grace and an overwhelming sense of sorrow. The figure's eyes, empty yet full of unspeakable grief, locked onto mine, and in that silent exchange, I felt the full weight of its tragic existence. In the aftermath of that confrontation, the oppressive terror that had gripped my home began to subside into a haunting, unresolved melancholy. The spectral presence slowly faded into the darkness, leaving behind an echo of its sorrow and a lingering reminder of the night my solitude became a living nightmare. I realized that the mystery of my home was far greater than a mere haunting. It was a tapestry of lost stories, hidden regrets, and the eternal yearning for peace. Even now, each creak of the floor and whisper of the wind serves as a reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets reside right under our roof. Thank you very much for watching today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel to stay informed when the next video comes out. And tell me, what did you think of today's stories? See you in the next video.